You have been lied to about space exploration. Every documentary shows humans bouncing between planets like tourists hopping trains across Europe. Mars today, the moons of Jupiter tomorrow, maybe Saturn's rings by next weekend. The math seems simple. Build faster ships, travel farther, visit more worlds. But scientists have discovered something that shatters this fantasy completely. The limit is not speed. It is not distance. It is not even technology. The real barrier is devastatingly human. Your body can only survive a finite number of deep space missions before cumulative damage makes another launch impossible. The question is not how far can we go. The question is how many times can we go anywhere at all? That number will break your imagination. If you enjoy understanding the true boundaries of human exploration, hit that like button and subscribe. Now, settle in. Let's begin. The most dangerous lie in space exploration hides inside a single word: mission. When you hear that an astronaut completed a mission to the International Space Station, your brain processes it like any other professional assignment. Flew there, did the work, came home, like a surgeon performing an operation or a pilot completing a transatlantic route. Demanding, certainly, but repeatable. Something you could do again next month, next year, for an entire career. This understanding is catastrophically wrong. A space mission is not a trip. It is a systematic assault on the human body that begins months before launch and continues years after landing. The violence starts the moment engines ignite and does not truly end until rehabilitation completes, if it ever completes at all. Understanding what a mission genuinely costs in biological currency reveals why the number of worlds any human can reach in one lifetime is not limited by distance, speed, or technology. It is limited by how many times the human body can survive the process of leaving Earth and returning. The question that should terrify every aspiring explorer is not how far can we travel. The question is, how many times can we travel anywhere at all? Every deep space mission consists of 5 distinct phases, each extracting payment from the human body in currencies that cannot be fully replenished. Launch subjects astronauts to forces that would hospitalize ordinary people. Transit exposes them to radiation levels that accumulate permanent cellular damage with every passing hour. Destination operations demand physical exertion in environments actively hostile to human biology. Return journey compounds transit exposure, while the body has already been weakened by months or years of assault. Recovery requires extensive rehabilitation that never fully restores pre-mission baselines, no matter how much time passes or how aggressively therapists intervene. Each of these phases costs something, and the total cost of one complete mission cycle determines how many cycles any human can complete before their body simply cannot do it again. Consider what happens during launch alone. The human body evolved under one gravity, constant and unchanging for 4 billion years of biological development. Every system, every organ, every cellular process calibrated itself to function under precisely this gravitational load. During rocket ascent, astronauts experience forces reaching 3 to 4 times Earth's gravity, pressing against their chest, spine, and internal organs. Blood pools in their lower extremities as hearts strain to pump against artificial weight. Spinal discs compress under loads they were never designed to bear. Eyeballs flatten slightly as fluid shifts within the skull. The violence of escaping Earth's gravity well imprints itself on every organ system in ways we are only beginning to understand. Launch is not merely uncomfortable. It is traumatic at the cellular level. Tissues stretch and compress, blood vessels strain. The vestibular system, designed for gentle movements across African savannas, receives signals so intense they border on incoherent noise. But launch trauma represents merely the entry fee for a much more expensive journey. Transit through deep space introduces the silent destroyer that mission planners fear most: cosmic radiation passes through spacecraft hulls like high-energy bullets through tissue paper. Unlike terrestrial radiation sources, cosmic rays consist of heavy atomic nuclei, stripped of their electrons and accelerated to enormous velocities by supernova explosions that occurred billions of years ago. These particles carry so much energy that they slice through DNA, creating damage that accumulates with every passing hour of exposure. On Earth, our planet's magnetic field and thick atmosphere provide a double shield against cosmic radiation. Humans evolved under this protection, never developing robust biological defenses against the radiation environment that exists beyond it. Astronauts on the International Space Station still receive partial protection from Earth's magnetosphere. Mars-bound astronauts would leave Earth's magnetic shield behind within hours of departure. For the remaining months of transit, they would absorb radiation equivalent to roughly a full-body CT scan every 1 to 2 weeks. This continues without pause for the entire outbound journey, the surface stay, and the entire return journey. A round trip to Mars exposes astronauts to radiation doses that measurably increase lifetime cancer risk, may accelerate cardiovascular aging, and could produce detectable cognitive changes. Each mission consumes more than just time. It consumes future missions. The radiation absorbed during one deep space journey does not reset when the astronaut returns to Earth. That damage accumulates permanently, waiting to combine with future exposure. The biological ledger does not clear. How this accumulation compounds across multiple missions reveals why mission count faces such severe limits. Space agencies track lifetime radiation limits for astronauts, measured in units called millisieverts. In 2021, NASA established a uniform career limit of 600 millisieverts for all astronauts, regardless of age or sex, replacing earlier guidelines that varied by demographic factors. Current estimates suggest a single Mars round trip could deliver between 500 and 1200 millisieverts depending on solar activity and mission duration. This means one journey to Mars might consume the entire career radiation allowance, or even exceed it. A single mission could permanently ground an astronaut from further deep space flight based on radiation exposure alone. The implications cascade immediately. An astronaut who flies to Mars once has dramatically reduced their remaining radiation budget. A second Mars mission would consume most or all of what remains. A third mission would exceed career limits, rendering the astronaut medically ineligible for further deep space flight, regardless of their age, fitness, or willingness to accept personal risk. The institution will not permit it. This brings us back to the real limit that governs human space exploration. Not the void between worlds, but the number of times a body can cross that void before crossing it becomes institutionally or biologically impossible. The transit phase introduces another insidious cost that operates through completely different mechanisms than radiation damage. Microgravity eliminates the constant loading that maintains bone density and muscle mass. Within days of reaching space, the human body begins cannibalizing itself. Without gravitational stress signaling the need for strong bones, skeletal systems start releasing calcium into the bloodstream at rates approaching 1 to 2% per month. Muscles atrophy when they no longer fight against constant downward pull. The heart, now pumping against reduced resistance in a body where blood no longer pools in the legs, begins shrinking and weakening. Astronauts on the International Space Station exercise 2 hours daily, specifically to combat these effects. They use resistance machines, stationary bicycles and treadmills with harness systems that simulate body weight. These countermeasures represent the most sophisticated exercise protocols ever designed. Informed by decades of spaceflight medical research, even with aggressive intervention, astronauts return to Earth with measurable bone loss and cardiovascular deconditioning. The exercise protocols slow the degradation. They do not prevent it. A 6-month station mission produces bone density losses of 6 to 12% in load-bearing structures like the spine and femur. Cardiovascular capacity declines measurably. Muscle mass decreases despite resistance training. Deep space missions lasting years rather than months would amplify these losses despite any exercise regimen engineers can design into spacecraft. Transit times to Mars range from 6 to 9 months each way depending on orbital mechanics. Surface operations might last 18 months, waiting for the next favourable Earth return window. Total mission duration stretches to roughly 2.5 to 3 years. Confirmed medical data from long-duration International Space Station missions reveals disturbing patterns that inform deep space planning. Astronaut Scott Kelly spent 340 consecutive days in orbit, while researchers compared his physiology to his identical twin brother who remained on Earth. The twins' study provided unprecedented insight into what extended spaceflight does to human biology. The results showed alterations across virtually every system examined. Gene expression patterns shifted, with some changes persisting for months after return. Telomeres, the protective caps on chromosomes that normally shorten with age, paradoxically lengthened during spaceflight before rapidly shortening after landing. Gut microbiome composition changed significantly. Cognitive performance on certain tasks declined measurably. Carotid artery walls thickened in patterns associated with cardiovascular disease progression. Many changes reversed after return to Earth. Some did not. And this data came from a mission protected by Earth's magnetosphere, spared the full cosmic radiation exposure that deep space travelers would face. The deep space scenario is worse. Possibly much worse. Now consider what this means for the mission count question that defines the boundaries of human exploration. A single deep space mission to Mars and back requires approximately 2.5 to 3 years from launch to landing, depending on orbital mechanics and surface stay duration. The astronaut then faces 1 to 3 years of rehabilitation before their body approaches pre-mission baselines. Even then, certain changes may persist permanently. Bone density recovery is incomplete. Cardiovascular adaptations leave subtle traces. Radiation damage accumulates in cellular DNA. This creates a fundamental mathematical constraint that has nothing to do with rocket speed or fuel efficiency. If recovery from one Mars mission requires 2 to 3 years, and the mission itself takes nearly 3 years, a single Mars round trip consumes 5 to 6 years of an astronaut's functional career. That is 5 to 6 years during which they cannot attempt another deep space mission. 5 to 6 years consumed by reaching one destination a single time. The mathematics allow no escape. An astronaut hoping to complete multiple deep space missions must stack these multi-year blocks end to end across a career that biology limits to perhaps 25 years of peak spaceflight capability. The numbers constrain mission count to small integers regardless of ambition or funding. Mission count is finite, not because space is vast, but because recovery is slow and incomplete. The space agencies do not discuss this publicly because it undermines the heroic narrative they need for funding and recruitment. Press releases celebrate mission accomplishments. Career statistics highlight total time in space. Nobody tallies the cost in future missions foreclosed, in biological capacity permanently depleted, in exploration potential consumed with each journey completed. But mission planners know the truth. Deep space exploration is not limited by how far ships can travel. It is limited by how many times human bodies can survive the journey and retain the capacity to do it again. Historical data from astronaut corps worldwide confirms this pattern with uncomfortable clarity. Among the hundreds of humans who have flown to space since Yuri Gagarin's pioneering orbit in 1961, only a small fraction completed more than 3 missions. The record for most spaceflights by a single individual currently stands at 7 missions, held by astronauts who flew exclusively to low Earth orbit, where radiation exposure and transit stresses remain far below deep space levels. No human has ever walked on the moon more than once. Among the 12 Apollo astronauts who set foot on the lunar surface, each landing mission was their only lunar surface experience. 2 astronauts, John Young and Eugene Cernan, traveled to the moon twice. first on orbital missions and later on landing missions, but even they achieved only one surface expedition each. The cost of deep space missions limited what even the most accomplished astronauts could repeat. Some might argue that astronauts from the early space programs were limited by technology and programmatic decisions rather than biology. Perhaps modern medicine, improved spacecraft design, and better countermeasures could enable more missions. Perhaps the Apollo limitation reflected Cold War priorities rather than fundamental constraints. But examine the International Space Station era, where technology and medical support have advanced dramatically. Despite 6 decades of spaceflight experience and revolutionary improvements in life support systems, astronauts still require extensive rehabilitation after missions of 6 months or longer. Flight surgeons still document bone loss, cardiovascular changes, and visual impairments. The fundamental biological constraints have not changed because human evolution has not changed. Our bodies still expect one gravity, atmospheric protection, and terrestrial radiation levels. No amount of engineering can override 4 billion years of evolutionary calibration. Consider the specific case of bone density loss in detail, because bones illustrate the mission count problem with particular clarity. On Earth, bones constantly remodel themselves through cycles of breakdown and rebuilding. Specialized cells called osteoclasts dissolve old bone tissue, while osteoblasts lay down new material. Weight-bearing activity stimulates this process, maintaining density appropriate for the gravitational loads the skeleton must bear. The system is dynamic, responsive, and remarkably effective at keeping bones strong for terrestrial life. In microgravity, the signaling that triggers bone maintenance largely ceases. The body interprets absence of gravitational stress as permission to conserve resources by reducing skeletal investment. Osteoclast activity continues dissolving bone, but osteoblast activity drops because the mechanical signals demanding new bone formation have disappeared. Research from International Space Station missions shows astronauts lose 1 to 2% of bone mineral density per month in load-bearing bones like the lumbar spine and proximal femur. A 6-month mission results in 6 to 12% total loss in these critical structures. This rate of loss would be considered pathological in any terrestrial medical context. It would trigger immediate intervention and investigation. Partial recovery occurs after return to Earth. Weight-bearing activity resumes the mechanical signaling that stimulates bone formation. Osteoblasts become active again. New bone material begins replacing what was lost. But studies tracking astronauts for years after their missions show this recovery is incomplete. Astronauts retain measurable bone deficits long after their missions end. The skeleton never quite returns to its pre-flight baseline. Now, extend this pattern to deep space timelines. A Mars mission involving 18 months of cumulative microgravity exposure during outbound and return transit would produce bone losses far exceeding what station astronauts experience. The losses would reach clinically significant levels, comparable to conditions normally associated with elderly patients at elevated fracture risk. More critically, studies show that bone recovery after spaceflight is incomplete. Astronauts do not return to their pre-flight baseline, regardless of rehabilitation effort or time allowed. Each mission begins from wherever the previous recovery plateau left the skeleton. The body keeps score, and that score never fully resets to zero. The body keeps score, and that score never fully resets to zero. Similar compounding applies to cardiovascular changes that accumulate with each mission cycle. The heart adapts to reduced workload in microgravity by becoming smaller and less efficient. Why maintain cardiac capacity you do not need? The body conserves resources by allowing the heart muscle to atrophy, just as skeletal muscles atrophy. Astronauts returning from long-duration missions experience orthostatic intolerance, meaning they cannot stand upright for extended periods without feeling faint or actually losing consciousness. Their cardiovascular systems have forgotten how to pump effectively against gravity, how to maintain blood pressure when blood pools in the legs, How to deliver oxygen to a brain. Suddenly positioned above a column of blood, the heart must lift with every beat. Rehabilitation restores most cardiovascular function over weeks to months. But again, recovery shows evidence of incompleteness. Subtle changes in heart rhythm variability, vascular elasticity, and blood pressure regulation may persist indefinitely. The heart that flew to space is not quite the heart that launches again, even after thorough rehabilitation. Each subsequent mission adds new changes on top of incompletely healed old changes. The cardiovascular system progressively loses resilience, accumulating adaptations that layer upon previous adaptations in ways cardiologists are still working to understand. Even if the distance were trivial, these biological costs would limit how many times any human could make the journey. You could teleport to Mars instantaneously and still face the challenges of operating in hostile environments, accumulating radiation exposure, and requiring extended recovery before attempting another mission. Distance is not the limiting factor. Recovery cycles are. The visual system adds another dimension to the compounding costs of spaceflight. Researchers discovered that approximately 70% of astronauts on long-duration space station missions develop a condition called spaceflight-associated neuroocular syndrome. Fluid shifts in microgravity increase pressure within the skull, which transmits to the optic nerve and physically reshapes the eyeball. Astronauts experience measurable changes in visual acuity, some of which persist after return to Earth. The implications for mission count are clear. Vision changes from Mission 1 may not fully resolve before Mission 2 begins. Additional fluid shifts compound previous damage. The optic nerve, which cannot regenerate, accumulates insults that eventually produce permanent impairment. An astronaut might fly 3 missions before their vision degrades to the point where they can no longer meet flight certification standards. This brings us back to the essential truth that mission count, not distance, defines the boundaries of human exploration. You could theoretically build a spacecraft capable of reaching any destination in the solar system. Nuclear thermal propulsion, already tested in the 1960s, could dramatically reduce transit times. Ion drives could provide efficient continuous acceleration. Solar sails could harvest free energy from sunlight. Fusion propulsion, if developed, could transform interplanetary travel. You could engineer artificial gravity through rotating habitats that provide centrifugal force mimicking gravitational loading. You could develop radiation shielding using water, polyethylene, or magnetic fields that deflect charged particles. You could design closed-loop life support systems that recycle every resource indefinitely. Even with all these technological miracles, the fundamental constraint remains unchanged. Each launch, each transit, each return extracts payment from finite biological reserves. The question is not how far can we travel. The question is, how many times can we survive the traveling? The answer, as we will explore through the following sections, is disturbingly small. The worlds any human could realistically visit in one lifetime number in single digits, under the most optimistic scenarios. More realistic assessments suggest even fewer. This is not a failure of imagination or engineering ambition. This is a constraint imposed by the architecture of human biology, evolved for one world and fundamentally unprepared for the violence of leaving it repeatedly. Understanding this limitation transforms how we should think about space exploration strategy. Every mission must count because every mission costs something irreplaceable. Every destination must be chosen with awareness that attempting to reach it closes doors to other destinations. The infinite frontier portrayed in science fiction collapses into a finite menu of achievable objectives, constrained not by the vastness of space, but by the fragility of the explorers who must cross it. The lifetime budget is not miles, it is not years, it is not fuel or funding. The lifetime budget is recoveries. How many times can a body be broken by spaceflight and rebuilt well enough to be broken again? The answer to that question determines everything else about what humans can achieve beyond Earth. The next phase of this journey examines how these costs compound across multiple missions, creating a debt curve that eventually becomes unpayable regardless of how healthy, motivated, or technologically supported the astronaut remains. Each mission makes the next mission harder. Each recovery leaves the body slightly less capable of the next recovery. The numbers tilt against exploration with every journey completed. The first mission changes you. The second mission changes what was already changed. This distinction sounds subtle, almost philosophical, but it represents the difference between sustainable exploration and a one-way countdown toward biological bankruptcy. Space agencies understand that deep space missions inflict damage. What they rarely discuss publicly is how that damage compounds rather than accumulates linearly, making each successive mission exponentially more costly than the last. Think of it like financial debt with compounding interest. Borrow money once, pay it back completely, and you return to zero. Your credit remains intact. Your future borrowing capacity stays unchanged. But borrow again before paying off the first loan. And suddenly you pay interest on interest. The debt grows faster than your payments can reduce it. The numbers turn against you with mathematical certainty. Human biology works through disturbingly similar mechanisms. The body can recover from one insult given enough time and favorable conditions. Evolution equipped us with remarkable repair systems that can heal wounds, rebuild tissues, and restore function after injury. But stack insults before recovery completes. And the damage builds on damage, creating deficits that become permanent features of your physiology rather than temporary setbacks. This compounding principle transforms the mission count question from simple arithmetic into exponential decay. Each mission does not simply subtract from a fixed pool of exploration capacity. Each mission reduces the capacity that remains for dealing with the next mission. The costs accelerate. The returns diminish. The curve bends inexorably toward a biological wall that no amount of determination can breach. Radiation exposure demonstrates this compounding effect most clearly because the mechanisms are well understood and ruthlessly mathematical. Cosmic rays damage DNA through two distinct mechanisms that operate on different timescales. Direct hits occur when a heavy charged particle physically strikes the molecular backbone of genetic material, breaking chemical bonds and severing the double helix. These direct strikes happen instantaneously, creating damage the moment the particle passes through cellular nuclei. Indirect hits generate reactive oxygen species, highly energetic molecular fragments that ricochet through cells, causing secondary damage for hours or days after the original particle has passed and been forgotten. Both types of damage can be repaired by cellular machinery that evolution refined over billions of years. Specialized enzymes patrol chromosomes constantly, detecting breaks and mismatches, recruiting repair proteins to damaged sites, orchestrating the reconstruction of genetic information. This system works remarkably well under normal terrestrial conditions, where radiation exposure remains low and repair systems can keep pace with incoming damage. But repair is not always perfect. Each repair attempt introduces a small probability of error. The enzymes that cut and splice DNA occasionally make mistakes, inserting wrong nucleotides or joining sequences incorrectly. Usually these errors fall in non-coding regions where they cause no harm. The genome contains vast stretches of apparently redundant sequence that can absorb mutations without consequence. Occasionally, however, errors occur in genes that regulate cell division, tumor suppression, or DNA repair itself. These mutations create potential cancers or other pathologies that may not manifest for years or decades after the original damage occurred. A particle that struck during a Mars transit in 2035 might contribute to a cancer diagnosis in 2055, with no way to trace the connection definitively. Here is where compounding becomes critical to understanding mission count limits. The probability of harmful errors increases with total damage because repair enzymes become overwhelmed when processing heavy repair loads. Think of a factory assembly line running at normal speed with adequate quality control. Errors are rare, Products meet specifications, now triple the line speed while keeping the same number of quality inspectors. Error rates climb not linearly, but exponentially, as the system loses the capacity for careful work. Radiation damage from Mission 1 may be mostly repaired before Mission 2 begins. Given 2 or 3 years of recovery, cells will have processed the backlog of breaks and mismatches. The genome will look superficially normal. An astronaut might feel completely healthy, pass all medical screenings, and receive clearance for another flight. But the repair errors persist. They represent permanent changes to the genome that cannot be undone because the repair system does not recognize its own mistakes as damage requiring correction. The mutated sequences become the new baseline, the template from which future copies are made. Mission 2 adds new damage on top of these permanent alterations. More repair attempts occur, generating more errors layered upon previous errors. The baseline keeps shifting upward, never resetting to the original pre-spaceflight condition. Studies of Chernobyl liquidators, the workers who cleaned up the 1986 nuclear disaster, confirm this pattern with tragic clarity. Radiation effects proved cumulative across lifetime exposure, with no evidence of a safe lower threshold below which damage could be ignored. Workers who received their doses in multiple smaller exposures showed similar long-term outcomes to those who received equivalent doses in single large exposures. The body does not forget previous radiation encounters. It simply adds new exposure to the running total, compounding the probability of eventual pathology. Atomic bomb survivors from Hiroshima and Nagasaki provided additional confirmation through decades of medical follow-up. Those who survived the initial blasts and subsequent radiation exposure showed elevated cancer rates that persisted for the remainder of their lives. The damage from 1945 continued expressing itself in 1975, 1995, and beyond. Radiation writes permanent entries in the biological ledger. Space agencies recognize this reality by setting career radiation limits rather than per-mission limits. NASA does not ask whether a single mission exceeds safe thresholds. The agency asks whether an astronaut's cumulative lifetime exposure, including all previous missions plus the proposed mission, would exceed acceptable career limits. This policy acknowledges that radiation damage compounds and that biological systems cannot distinguish between photons absorbed in separate missions years apart. For astronauts contemplating multiple deep space missions, the radiation mathematics becomes alarming when examined closely. Current estimates suggest a round-trip Mars mission would deliver between 500 and 1200 millisieverts of radiation exposure, depending on solar activity during transit, mission duration, and the effectiveness of whatever shielding engineers can provide. Solar minimum periods produce higher cosmic ray flux because the sun's magnetic field provides less deflection. Longer surface stays extend total exposure. Current shielding technology reduces but cannot eliminate the particle bombardment. NASA's current career limit stands at 600 millisieverts for all astronauts, a uniform standard adopted in 2021. This single number replaced earlier guidelines that varied by age and sex. The new limit was established partly for equity reasons but carries severe implications for deep space exploration planning. Consider what this means. A Mars mission delivering 700 millisieverts would exceed the career limit in one flight. The astronaut would return from their first deep space mission already over their lifetime allowance, permanently ineligible for further deep space assignments, regardless of how healthy they feel or how desperately they want to continue exploring. Even a favorable Mars mission, delivering only 500 millisieverts, would consume more than 80% of the career budget, leaving almost nothing for subsequent missions. 2 Mars missions become nearly impossible under current limits. An astronaut would need both missions to fall at the absolute lowest end of exposure estimates, with favorable solar conditions and minimal surface stay, to remain within 600 millisieverts total. The probability of achieving this twice approaches zero. Exceeding radiation limits does not cause immediate collapse or acute radiation syndrome. The astronaut would not feel sick upon crossing the threshold. What changes is the statistical probability of radiation-induced illness over the following decades. Cancer risk elevates measurably. Cardiovascular disease probability increases. Neurological conditions become more likely. The numbers shift from acceptable to unacceptable in the risk calculations that govern institutional decision-making. Space agencies will not clear astronauts for missions that push them beyond these thresholds, regardless of the astronaut's personal willingness to accept elevated risk. This represents an institutional barrier that compounds alongside biological damage. Even if an astronaut's body could theoretically survive another mission, the bureaucratic gatekeepers would not permit it. The lifetime budget is not miles, it is recoveries. Every deep space mission withdraws from a finite account of biological resilience that can never be fully replenished. The radiation portion of that account depletes with every mission and never regenerates. Bone density loss follows similar compounding patterns, but through entirely different mechanisms that make the problem even more intractable. The first mission strips bone mineral, as the skeleton responds to microgravity by reducing investment in structures that no longer bear load. Recovery on Earth rebuilds some but not all of what was lost, as weight-bearing activity restimulates bone formation. The second mission begins from this reduced baseline, not from the original healthy condition, and strips additional mineral through the same mechanisms. Recovery again proves incomplete, plateauing at a level lower than post-Mission 1 recovery achieved. With each cycle, the baseline drops lower. The ratchet only turns one direction. Bone can be lost quickly in microgravity but rebuilds slowly and incompletely under gravity. The asymmetry dooms astronauts to progressive skeletal weakening with each mission attempted. Confirmed longitudinal studies of International Space Station astronauts demonstrate this pattern with uncomfortable precision. Researchers tracking bone density for years after mission completion found that recovery plateaus approximately 12 to 24 months after return to Earth. Whatever density remains at that point becomes the new normal. Astronauts do not continue recovering indefinitely, gradually returning to pre-flight baselines over 3 or 5 or 10 years. They stabilize at a lower level and remain there. The mechanisms underlying incomplete recovery involve the fundamental architecture of bone tissue. Bones are not solid structures, but intricate lattices of mineralized collagen organized into load-bearing patterns refined over decades of use. When microgravity triggers demineralization, the loss occurs preferentially in certain regions based on local stress patterns. Trabecular bone, the spongy interior structure, degrades faster than cortical bone, the dense outer shell. Rebuilding trabecular architecture requires not just mineral deposition, but reconstruction of the three-dimensional lattice in patterns that provide mechanical strength. This architectural restoration never fully completes, because the signaling mechanisms that guided original bone development during adolescence are no longer active in adult skeletons. The body can add mineral but cannot perfectly recreate the youthful structure that existed before spaceflight. Consider an astronaut who begins their career with peak bone density measured at 100% of age-matched healthy controls. They represent the ideal candidate, young enough for resilience, but mature enough for the judgment spaceflight demands. After their first deep space mission involving 18 months of microgravity exposure and 2 years of rehabilitation, they might stabilize at 92% of their original density, 8% permanently lost. This deficit would be undetectable in daily life, but measurable on research-grade bone density scans. Their second mission begins from this reduced baseline. The same 18 months of microgravity strips bone at similar rates, but now the loss accumulates on top of existing deficits. After Mission 2 and another incomplete recovery, they stabilize at perhaps 85%, 15% below their career starting point. Still functional, but the trendline points unmistakably downward. Mission 3 pushes them to 78%. By any standard medical definition, they now have osteopenia, the clinical precursor to osteoporosis. Their fracture risk has elevated measurably. Their skeleton has aged decades beyond their chronological years. Space agencies screen astronauts for bone health before clearing them for missions. Dual-energy X-ray absorptiometry scans measure density precisely. Thresholds exist below, which astronauts become medically disqualified from further spaceflight, regardless of their training, experience, or personal willingness to accept fracture risk. The institution protects itself from liability and protects astronauts from themselves by enforcing biological boundaries through administrative mechanisms. An astronaut approaching osteopenia thresholds after 2 missions would find their 3rd mission application denied. Not because funding disappeared or spacecraft became unavailable, but because their skeleton has accumulated compounding debt beyond what the medical system will tolerate. Muscle atrophy compounds through related but distinct mechanisms that add another dimension to the debt accumulation problem. Skeletal muscle lost in microgravity can largely be rebuilt through aggressive rehabilitation, unlike bone. This sounds like good news, until you examine the details. The muscle that returns differs from the muscle that was lost. Studies using muscle biopsies from astronauts before and after missions show that regenerated muscle fibers have altered properties compared to original tissue. The proportions of fast-twitch versus slow-twitch fibers may shift. The density of mitochondria, the cellular powerhouses that fuel muscle contraction, may differ. The architecture of connective tissue organizing muscle bundles may not perfectly restore. Over multiple mission cycles, these subtle compositional changes accumulate. Muscle that has been lost and rebuilt 3 times is not identical to muscle that developed normally and was never challenged by microgravity. The functional implications remain subjects of ongoing research, but the trajectory points toward degraded performance with repeated cycling. More critically, the cellular machinery responsible for muscle maintenance accumulates damage through radiation exposure and oxidative stress. The satellite cells that repair muscle damage can self-renew, but their regenerative capacity diminishes with repeated activation cycles and age. Each major repair effort taxes this system. Multiple missions progressively degrade the repair reservoir's effectiveness, making each subsequent recovery slower and less complete. Each repair cycle consumes some of these cells, depleting the reservoir available for future repairs. The satellite cell population does not fully replenish itself. Multiple missions progressively drain this repair capacity, making each subsequent recovery slower and less complete regardless of how diligently the astronaut follows rehabilitation protocols. An astronaut who has flown 3 deep space missions may find that their muscles respond to rehabilitation with diminishing enthusiasm, not because they train less intensively, but because the cellular infrastructure supporting muscle regeneration has been depleted below critical thresholds. The 4th mission becomes impossible, not because of bone or radiation limits, but because muscles can no longer recover from spaceflight insult. Cardiovascular changes add yet another layer to the compounding debt that limits mission count. Hearts that have adapted to microgravity and then readapted to terrestrial gravity show subtle alterations in rhythm, structure, and electrical conduction that persist beyond obvious recovery periods. The heart muscle remodels itself in response to workload, and the remodeling that occurs during spaceflight leaves traces that subsequent remodeling cannot entirely erase. High-resolution cardiac imaging of astronauts years after their missions reveals minor alterations in heart wall thickness, chamber dimensions, and the patterns of electrical activation that coordinate heartbeats. Most of these changes fall within normal variation and would not concern a cardiologist examining a non-astronaut patient, but they represent departures from the individual astronaut's pre-flight baseline that accumulate with repeated missions. One mission produces minor persistent changes that might be detectable only through careful comparison with pre-flight data. 2 missions produce additional changes layered on top of the first set, creating a cardiovascular system that has adapted and readapted multiple times. 3 missions create a heart increasingly different from its original configuration, potentially crossing thresholds that concern flight surgeons reviewing astronaut medical files, even if the absolute measurements remain within normal population ranges. The concern is not that any single change is dangerous, but that the trajectory suggests ongoing remodeling stress. A heart that keeps changing structure suggests a cardiovascular system that has not found stable equilibrium, that continues adapting to conflicting signals from repeated environmental challenges. At some point, medical review boards may conclude that the pattern indicates elevated risk, regardless of whether any specific measurement exceeds clinical thresholds. The psychological dimension of compounding may be least visible externally, but proves most limiting for some astronauts attempting extended exploration careers. Deep space missions subject crews to isolation, confinement, communication delays, and environmental monotony for months or years at a time. The psychological literature describes this environment as extreme, comparable in stress level to Antarctic winter-over expeditions, submarine deployments, and solitary confinement. The documented effects include mood disruption, cognitive changes, sleep disorders, and interpersonal conflicts that can threaten mission success. First-time astronauts typically manage these stressors through novelty and achievement motivation. Everything is new. Every challenge represents a first. The mission carries profound meaning that sustains psychological resilience through difficult periods. Being among the first humans to reach Mars would generate internal motivation sufficient to overcome almost any psychological challenge. Return to Earth provides relief, debriefing, support, and celebration that help process the experience. The astronaut integrates their mission into their life narrative, derives meaning from their achievement, and rebuilds the psychological resources expended during flight. Second-time astronauts face fundamentally different psychological terrain. The novelty has faded. They know exactly what isolation and confinement feel like, stripped of the excited uncertainty that made first exposure tolerable. They understand the mission arc and can anticipate the psychological low points. The monotonous middle period when initial excitement has faded, but destination arrival remains months away. Some astronauts report that subsequent missions feel subjectively harder rather than easier, precisely because they cannot rely on novelty to sustain them. The second Mars mission would not make anyone the first human to reach Mars. The psychological fuel that powered the first mission is simply not available for refilling. Psychological recovery between missions requires not just time but active meaning-making. Astronauts must process their experiences, integrate them into their sense of identity, and rebuild motivation for future missions that cannot offer the same firsts the previous mission provided. This psychological reconstruction cannot be rushed. It follows its own timeline that may not align with mission planning schedules or launch window availability. Attempting another mission before psychological recovery completes increases risk of in-flight mood disorders, interpersonal conflict with crewmates, and performance degradation on critical tasks. The consequences of psychological failure during deep space mission extend far beyond the individual astronaut's suffering. They threaten mission success and crew safety in environments where evacuation is impossible and Earth-based support operates through communication delays measured in tens of minutes. This brings us back to the real limit that governs mission count. Not the void between worlds, but the recoveries required between crossings. Institutional barriers compound alongside biological and psychological factors, creating bureaucratic friction that grows with each mission attempt. Space agencies require astronauts to maintain certifications in hundreds of procedures, systems, and emergency responses. These certifications are not permanent credentials earned once and retained forever. They expire on defined schedules and must be renewed through training, simulation, and demonstration of continued competence. Between missions, astronauts must balance rehabilitation with recertification, creating schedule pressures that can significantly delay readiness for next mission assignment. An astronaut recovering from a 3-year Mars mission needs 2 to 3 years of rehabilitation. During that period, certifications continue expiring. By the time they complete physical recovery, they may need extensive retraining before they qualify for flight assignment. The retraining itself takes time. Potentially another year or more for a mission to a new destination requiring different vehicle systems and procedures. Medical review boards examine astronauts more stringently after each successive mission. First mission astronauts receive baseline scrutiny, thorough but routine. The agency expects them to be healthy and looks mainly for disqualifying conditions that somehow escaped previous screening. Second mission astronauts face heightened attention focused on any abnormalities detected after Mission 1. Did bone density recover fully? Did cardiac imaging show any concerning changes? Did psychological evaluation reveal residual effects from isolation and confinement? Each finding generates questions and requirements for additional testing before clearance can be granted. Third mission astronauts encounter boards looking, consciously or not, for any excuse to ground them. This behavior stems not from malice, but from institutional risk aversion. Every additional mission increases the probability of something going wrong. Every astronaut with extensive spaceflight history carries accumulated damage that elevates risk compared to fresh candidates. Boards that clear veteran astronauts for additional missions accept institutional liability if something goes wrong. Boards that ground veterans based on marginal findings face little criticism. The practical effect is that the institutional pathway to each subsequent mission grows longer and more uncertain. Mission 1 might require 4 years from initial selection to launch, following a well-defined track with predictable milestones. Mission 2 might require 6 years due to extended rehabilitation, enhanced medical screening, and recertification backlogs created by the recovery period. Mission 3 might require 8 years or prove impossible if medical boards detect concerning trends that provide justification for denial. Now, apply these compounding factors systematically to the mission count question. An astronaut beginning a deep space career at age 35 completes Mission 1, including launch, outbound transit, destination operations, return transit, and post-mission recovery, by approximately age 40 or 41. Their body has absorbed significant radiation damage, lost bone density that will never fully restore, and experienced cardiovascular adaptations that leave subtle traces. Psychological processing continues, requiring meaning-making that cannot be forced. Mission 2 clearance might come at age 44 or 45, after extended medical evaluation demonstrates adequate recovery. Recertification programs restore flight qualifications, and assignment processes place them on a specific mission. The mission itself consumes another 3 years of outbound transit, surface operations, and return journey. Recovery extends their timeline to age 50 or 51. By now, the astronauts' baseline biology has shifted significantly from where they began at 35. Radiation exposure approaches or reaches career limits depending on the specifics of their 2 missions. Bone density has declined through 2 incomplete recovery cycles, potentially approaching clinical thresholds. Cardiovascular changes have accumulated across 2 adaptation cycles. Psychological resilience has been tested twice, with uncertain reserves remaining for a 3rd test. Mission 3, consideration at age 51, faces multiple compounding obstacles. Medical boards are reviewing an astronaut with measurable deficits compared to younger candidates who have not yet accumulated spaceflight damage. Radiation margins are tight, possibly already exceeded for female astronauts or those whose missions encountered solar particle events. Bone density trends show clear decline that will only continue if another mission is attempted. Psychological evaluation cannot guarantee that motivation sufficient to sustain a 3rd multi-year isolation period exists. Even if somehow cleared for Mission 3 despite these accumulating concerns, the astronaut would complete transit, operations, and recovery around age 57. This approaches the age at which most astronauts have historically retired from active flight status, regardless of mission history. The body at 57 is not the body at 35. Recovery takes longer. Tolerance for physiological stress decreases. The window for a 4th mission has essentially closed. The theoretical 4th mission becomes nearly impossible under any realistic scenario. The biological debt has compounded beyond what any institution would accept. The calendar has consumed decades. The body that could survive Mission 1 at 35 is fundamentally different from the body considering Mission 4 at 57. Each mission changed what the previous missions had already changed, compounding damage in ways that simple accumulation cannot capture. This analysis assumes optimal outcomes at every step. It assumes no complications during any mission, no injuries requiring extended recovery, no solar particle events dumping extra radiation beyond normal galactic cosmic ray exposure, no unexpected bone loss exceeding predictions, no psychological crises requiring intervention, no equipment failures extending mission duration. Any complication at any point extends timelines and accelerates debt accumulation. An injury during Mission 2 might require years of additional recovery before Mission 3 consideration becomes possible. A solar particle event during transit might dump radiation equivalent to an extra year of galactic cosmic ray exposure, consuming margin that was budgeted for future missions. Unexpectedly, severe bone loss might trigger immediate grounding, regardless of the astronaut's career aspirations or the agency's plans. The compounding debt means that mission count does not scale linearly with career length. Doubling an astronaut's potential career from age 35 to 65 does not double their mission count because each additional mission costs more than the previous one. The curve bends against exploration, eventually becoming vertical as biological and institutional barriers align to make further missions impossible regardless of time remaining. Understanding this compounding dynamic reveals why the worlds reachable in one human lifetime are so few. Each destination costs not just the mission required to reach it, but the reduced capacity for all future missions. Choosing to visit Mars means having less capability remaining for anything else. Choosing to visit a Jupiter moon means even less remaining. The exploration budget is finite, and spending cannot be reversed. There is no bankruptcy protection in biology, no restructuring plan that restores depleted capacity. The lifetime budget is not miles, it is recoveries, and recoveries become progressively less complete with each mission cycle attempted. The next section examines how mission opportunity windows interact with these compounding constraints, creating scheduling conflicts that further limit what any human can actually achieve within the span of one life. Even if bodies could recover faster, even if institutions could clear astronauts more quickly, the planets themselves move on schedules that impose additional constraints beyond human control. Planets do not wait for astronauts to recover. This simple astronomical fact imposes constraints as absolute as any biological limit, yet far less discussed in popular accounts of space exploration. While human bodies slowly rebuild from deep space damage, orbital mechanics proceed on schedules set by gravity and momentum billions of years ago. The windows for efficient travel between worlds open and close according to celestial timelines that cannot be negotiated, delayed, or circumvented through clever engineering. The universe operates on its own clock. Human careers operate on another. Where these two timekeeping systems conflict, the universe always wins. Understanding launch windows requires abandoning the intuitive notion that spacecraft fly in straight lines between destinations like airplanes crossing oceans. They do not. Spacecraft follow curved trajectories governed by the gravitational fields of the Sun and planets, falling along paths that orbital mechanics dictates with mathematical precision. The most efficient transfers between worlds occur only when planetary positions align favorably, minimizing fuel requirements and transit times. These alignments happen on predictable schedules, but the gaps between favorable windows measure in years rather than weeks or months. Miss a window and the next opportunity lies far in the future. No amount of rocket power can compensate for unfavorable planetary geometry. The fuel costs of fighting orbital mechanics quickly exceed what any practical spacecraft can carry. Astronauts and mission planners must work within windows that the solar system provides, not windows that human schedules might prefer. Mars offers the most accessible deep space destination beyond the Moon, making it the obvious first target for human exploration of other worlds. The red planet orbits relatively close to Earth compared to the outer solar system. Transit times remain manageable with current propulsion technology. The scientific and symbolic value of human footprints on Mars exceeds virtually any other destination. But even Mars, the easiest major target, presents window constraints that interact devastatingly with biological recovery timelines. Mars opposition windows, the periods when Earth and Mars align favorably for efficient transfers, occur approximately every 26 months. This rhythm emerges from the different orbital periods of the two planets. Earth completes its solar orbit in 12 months. Mars requires roughly 24 months. The geometry that permits fuel-efficient transfers repeats only when Earth catches up to and passes Mars in their endless race around the Sun. Miss a Mars window, and the next opportunity lies more than 2 years away. For an astronaut recovering from a previous mission, watching a window close means watching years of potential career time evaporate. The gap between good windows can stretch even longer when mission planners impose fuel efficiency requirements that narrow acceptable launch periods to mere weeks within the broader opposition window. Now, layer biological recovery timelines onto this celestial calendar. The mathematics immediately create conflicts that no amount of determination can resolve. A Mars mission lasting approximately 30 months for outbound transit, surface operations, and Earth return would leave an astronaut requiring 2 to 3 years of rehabilitation before approaching pre-mission baselines. We established in previous sections why this recovery cannot be rushed. The compounding debt demands payment in time. Is time spent watching windows open and close? Consider the specific arithmetic that governs career planning. An astronaut launching for Mars in 2030 arrives back on Earth in late 2032 or early 2033, depending on the specific mission architecture and surface stay duration. 3 years of recovery extends their rehabilitation period to 2035 or 2036 before they could realistically be considered for another deep space assignment. The next efficient Mars window after their return might open in 2034. They must wait for the window after that, perhaps 2036 or 2037. But if their recovery runs long due to complications, unusual bone loss, or psychological factors requiring extended processing, a single mission to Mars, followed by necessary recovery, can easily consume 2 Mars opposition cycles. The astronaut returns from their first mission and cannot fly again for 4 to 5 years due to the interaction between biological necessity and orbital opportunity. This delay compounds with all the other factors limiting mission count, further constraining what any human can achieve. Even if the distance were trivial, the windows would not be. Planetary alignments enforce waiting periods that cannot be circumvented through better technology or faster ships. A spacecraft capable of reaching Mars in 1 month rather than 6 months would still need to launch during favorable windows. The transfer geometry matters regardless of transit speed. The calendar trap captures astronauts between biological necessity and orbital opportunity with no escape route. The situation compounds dramatically for destinations beyond Mars, where window constraints become even more restrictive and transit times extend mission durations into career-consuming decades. Jupiter's moons present scientifically compelling targets that have captured scientific imagination since Galileo first observed them 4 centuries ago. Europa's subsurface ocean, detected through magnetic field measurements and surface geology, might harbour conditions suitable for life. Ganymede, the largest moon in the solar system, offers a thin atmosphere and magnetic field that could provide partial radiation shielding. Callisto, heavily cratered and geologically quiet, presents the most radiation-protected environment among the Galilean moons. But Jupiter launch windows occur only every 13 months, as Earth catches up to the giant planet in their respective orbits. This faster window cadence compared to Mars might seem advantageous until you consider the transit times involved. Current propulsion technology would require roughly 2.5 to 3 years for one-way transit to Jupiter, depending on trajectory and gravity assist opportunities. A round-trip mission, including meaningful surface operations on one of the moons, would span approximately 6 years minimum from Earth departure to Earth return. Recovery from such extended microgravity exposure and radiation accumulation, far exceeding what Mars missions would impose, would require 4 to 5 years minimum before another deep space assignment could be considered. Combined, a single Jupiter mission consumes a decade of an astronaut's functional career before they could even theoretically begin preparing for another deep space assignment. One mission, 10 years. The numbers permit no argument. An astronaut who launches for Europa at age 35 returns at age 41. Recovery extends to age 45 or 46. By the time they could be considered for another deep space mission, they would be approaching the age ceiling beyond which agencies become reluctant to approve multi-year expeditions. Their first Jupiter mission might well be their last deep space mission of any kind, regardless of health, status, or continued motivation. Launch windows for outer solar system destinations beyond Jupiter become even more restrictive, effectively placing those worlds beyond consideration for any human hoping to visit multiple destinations in one lifetime. Saturn opposition occurs roughly every 12.5 months, slightly faster than Jupiter's 13-month cycle, but efficient transfers to Saturn require specific planetary configurations that repeat on much longer cycles than simple opposition timing would suggest. The most fuel-efficient trajectories use gravity assists from inner planets, borrowing momentum from Venus or Earth flybys to reach the outer solar system without prohibitive fuel requirements. These gravity assist opportunities depend on multi-planet alignments that occur far less frequently than simple opposition cycles. The Cassini spacecraft, which explored Saturn's system for 13 years before its mission concluded in 2017, used a complex trajectory involving gravity assists from Venus twice and Earth once before finally heading towards Saturn. This specific sequence of planetary encounters could only occur when several worlds aligned appropriately. For human missions requiring round trips rather than one-way robotic exploration, the window constraints multiply. The trajectory that carries astronauts outward must connect to a trajectory that brings them home. Both legs must align with planetary positions that support efficient travel. The probability of all these factors coinciding within any given year drops dramatically compared to simple opposition windows. The window problem multiplies further when considering missions to multiple destinations within a single career. An astronaut hoping to visit both Mars and a Jupiter moon during their lifetime faces scheduling puzzles with no good solutions. Recovery from a Mars mission might align poorly with the next Jupiter window. The astronaut completes Mars rehabilitation just as a Jupiter opportunity passes, then must wait another 13 months for the next Jupiter window, while their biological clock continues advancing. By the time Jupiter alignment returns, they may have aged into a less favourable category for medical clearance, or institutional priorities may have shifted crew assignments. Recovery from a Jupiter mission would almost certainly exclude any subsequent Mars opportunity within remaining career span. An astronaut returning from Europa at 41 and completing recovery at 46 has perhaps one more mission opportunity before age-related factors close the door entirely. That final opportunity could be Mars, but it could not be Mars plus anything else. Jupiter consumed too much calendar time. The calendar trap creates brutal opportunity costs that cannot be avoided, only chosen among. Every destination selected is every other destination, foregone for some period that may extend beyond career viability. Institutional scheduling conflicts layer on top of orbital mechanics to further constrain what astronauts can realistically achieve. Spacecraft require years of development, testing, and integration before they are ready to carry human crews. The vehicle that will transport astronauts to Mars in 2035 is already being designed, with components being manufactured and tested years before any crew assignment. Mission architectures become fixed early in the development cycle. Changes become increasingly expensive and eventually impossible as hardware commits to specific configurations. Crews must train specifically for each mission, learning unique vehicle systems, practicing emergency procedures relevant to their specific spacecraft and trajectory, developing mission-specific skills for their particular destination, and building team cohesion with crewmates who will share confined spaces for years. This training cannot be generic. An astronaut hoping to fly on a Jupiter mission cannot simultaneously train for a Mars backup role. The vehicles differ. The procedures differ. The emergency responses differ. The scientific objectives and surface operations differ. Career paths must commit to specific trajectories, and those commitments may close off alternatives that later prove desirable. Consider an astronaut in their late 30s evaluating career options. A Mars mission is being crewed for launch in 4 years. A Jupiter mission is in early planning for launch in 8 years. Both represent career-defining opportunities. Both would consume years of preparation and recovery. If they commit to Mars training now, they will be unavailable for Jupiter crew selection when that process begins. By the time they return from Mars and complete recovery, the Jupiter mission will have launched without them. Their Mars experience would be valuable for a subsequent Mars mission, but not transferable to outer planet exploration. If they hold out for Jupiter, they forgo the Mars opportunity entirely. Jupiter training would consume the years when Mars preparation would need to occur. They bet their career on a mission that is still in early planning. Subject to funding uncertainties, technical challenges, and programmatic changes that could delay or cancel it entirely. There is no option that preserves flexibility. The calendar trap forces commitments that narrow future possibilities with each choice made. These scheduling constraints interact with the compounding biological debt, examined in previous sections, to create feedback loops that further limit lifetime achievement. Each recovery period must be long enough for genuine biological restoration. Rush recovery and risk launching with incomplete healing, elevated radiation sensitivity, compromised bone structure, or psychological fragility. The institutional gatekeepers will not approve flight status for astronauts showing signs of inadequate recovery. The medical standards exist specifically to prevent premature return to flight, but longer recovery periods increase the probability of missing favorable launch windows. An astronaut taking 3 years to recover, when 2 years would catch the next window, faces an impossible choice. Accept the window and accept elevated risk of in-flight problems. Miss the window and watch years of potential career time disappear while waiting for the next orbital alignment. Some astronauts might push for early clearance, arguing that their recovery has progressed adequately even if not completely. Medical review boards might accommodate such requests under pressure from program schedules or the astronaut's own determination. But each such accommodation increases risk in ways that accumulate across a career. An astronaut who launches slightly under-recovered once might suffer no consequences. Launch under-recovered twice, and the compounding debt grows faster than it would have with complete recovery between missions. The mission count ceiling drops because each mission inflicted more damage than necessary, consuming biological margin that could have supported additional flights if recovery had been respected. Risk accumulation adds yet another dimension to the calendar trap, imposing mission count ceilings that operate independently of biological recovery or window availability. Every space mission carries some probability of catastrophic failure. Hardware can malfunction. Software can contain errors. Human operators can make mistakes under stress. The space environment itself presents hazards that cannot be entirely engineered away. Rocket engines sometimes explode. Spacecraft sometimes depressurize. Entry vehicles sometimes fail thermal protection. Current estimates suggest roughly 1 to 2% mission loss rates for deep space travel, meaning 1 or 2 missions in 100 might end in crew fatality. This figure emerges from historical experience, engineering analysis, and probabilistic risk assessment. It may improve with technology development, but it will never reach zero. Space travel is inherently dangerous in ways that cannot be eliminated, while physics remains physics. 1 to 2% risk seems acceptable for a single mission. Astronauts accept this level of danger as part of their professional commitment. The public accepts this level of danger as the price of exploration. Agencies accept this level of danger as manageable given the benefits of successful missions, but risk compounds across multiple attempts following exponential mathematics that eventually exceed any acceptable threshold. If each mission carries 1% failure probability, 2 missions carry roughly 2% cumulative risk that at least one fails catastrophically. 3 missions approach 3%. 5 missions approach 5%. The probabilities compound because each mission represents an independent opportunity for disaster. An astronaut hoping to fly 10 missions over a long career would face approximately 10% cumulative probability that at least one of those missions ends in their death. This assumes constant per-mission risk, which is optimistic. As spacecraft age, as the astronaut accumulates biological debt, affecting performance, as fatigue and complacency potentially affect judgment, per-mission risk may actually increase over time. Space agencies will not clear astronauts for missions when cumulative career risk exceeds institutional thresholds. These thresholds vary by agency, by mission type, by political climate, and by the specific astronaut's profile. But thresholds exist, and they impose upper bounds on mission count that operate independently of biological factors. Even an astronaut with perfect health, ideal recovery between missions, and favorable window alignment eventually accumulates enough mission risk that agencies refuse further flight clearance. The ceiling exists around 5 to 7 missions under current risk models for orbital flights, though this varies considerably based on mission duration and destination. For deep space missions with inherently higher risk profiles than orbital flights, the ceiling drops significantly lower. Long transit times eliminate abort options that protect orbital crews. Communication delays measured in minutes or hours rather than seconds prevent real-time ground support during emergencies. Limited crew size means less redundancy in critical skills. Extended radiation exposure may impair cognitive function precisely when sharp thinking matters most. A deep space astronaut might hit institutional risk ceilings after just 2 or 3 missions, regardless of their continued physical condition or personal willingness to accept additional danger. The institution protects itself from the consequences of accumulated risk by limiting how much risk any individual can accumulate. This brings us back to the real limit governing human space exploration. Biological compounding says 2 to 4 deep space missions maximum. Calendar constraints say the same. Risk accumulation says the same. The constraints are independent but convergent. Window constraints also introduce opportunity costs that force astronauts to sacrifice some possibilities to enable others, with no option that maximizes both mission count and destination diversity. Consider an astronaut at age 43, evaluating options for their second deep space mission. They flew to Mars in their late 30s and have completed recovery. Several opportunities present themselves, each with different implications for remaining career potential. Mars offers another window in 2 years. Committing to this mission requires beginning mission-specific training immediately. The vehicle is already in production. The crew is being assembled. Slots are limited and competition is intense. Wait too long to commit, and the opportunity passes to other candidates. Europa offers a window in 5 years, with crew selection beginning now for a mission that will take years to prepare. The trajectory would carry them to the Jupiter system and back over roughly 6 years. Training would begin soon and intensify progressively until launch. The Moon offers near-continuous access for shorter missions that could be repeated multiple times within the career span remaining. Lunar surface operations would provide additional deep space experience without the multi-year commitments that planetary missions require. If the astronaut chooses Mars, they complete that second Mars mission and recovery around age 50. At that point, the Jupiter window they might have caught has long since passed. The Europa opportunity went to other astronauts who committed when commitment was required. Their remaining career might allow one more Mars attempt if health holds and windows align, or multiple lunar missions, but Jupiter is now almost certainly beyond reach. The calendar has closed that door. If they choose Jupiter, They commit to a mission that consumes the entire decade of their 40s. They complete around age 53 or 54, with biological debt from such an extended mission, likely precluding any subsequent deep space mission, regardless of destinations available. They will have visited 2 worlds, Mars and a Jupiter moon, but that will be the entirety of their deep space exploration career. If they choose the moon, they might complete 3 or 4 lunar missions during the same career window. More missions, but to only one destination beyond Earth. The exploration significance differs from planetary missions, and the lunar option consumes years that cannot then be invested in reaching more distant worlds. There is no option that maximizes everything. The calendar trap forces choices that sacrifice some possibilities to enable others. Every path taken is every other path not taken. The worlds reachable in one lifetime depend critically on which paths are selected early, when options remain most open and constraints have not yet fully manifested. Aging effects accelerate this narrowing of possibilities as careers progress toward their inevitable biological conclusions. Astronaut tolerance for launch stress, radiation exposure, microgravity adaptation, and recovery challenge declines measurably with age. The body at 50 responds differently to the same insults that the body at 35 managed with relative ease. Recovery times lengthen as regenerative systems slow. Medical screening becomes more likely to reveal conditions that disqualify candidates from flight status, not because those conditions suddenly appeared, but because aging bodies accumulate dysfunctions that eventually cross screening thresholds. The body that could manage mission stresses at 35 struggles with the same stresses at 55. This is not failure or weakness. This is biology. Every organ system ages. Every recovery mechanism slows. Every cellular repair process becomes less efficient. The astronauts' courage and determination remain constant while their biological capacity progressively declines. Space agencies have historically flown astronauts into their late 50s and occasionally their early 60s, but these have overwhelmingly been orbital missions with rapid abort options and relatively brief durations. John Glenn returned to space at 77, but for a 9-day shuttle mission with emergency landing options available within hours throughout. That is a fundamentally different risk profile than a 3-year Mars mission, with no abort possibility once the trajectory commits. Deep space missions, demanding years of continuous exposure and months of post-flight recovery, push practical age limits much lower than orbital experience might suggest. Most mission planners building serious human Mars architectures assume crews will be in their 30s and 40s, with diminishing probability of clearance beyond mid-50s regardless of individual health status. This age ceiling interacts with window timing to create additional constraints that can permanently close doors. An astronaut who misses an outer planet window in their mid-40s might never get another viable chance. By the time the next favourable alignment arrives 13 to 26 months later, they will be older. By the time training could complete and launch occur, they will be older still. By the time the mission concludes and recovery begins, they may have aged past institutional clearance thresholds for subsequent missions. The window that closes for orbital mechanics reasons remains closed for biological reasons even after the next orbital opportunity arrives. The astronaut did not become less skilled or less motivated. They simply aged past the point where institutions will approve multi-year deep space missions. Training requirements add yet another calendar burden that competes for the limited time available within any career. Deep space missions require years of dedicated preparation that cannot be compressed or shortcut. Astronauts must learn spacecraft systems in sufficient depth to operate, maintain, and repair them without real-time ground support. They must practice emergency procedures until responses become automatic. They must develop mission-specific skills for surface operations, scientific investigations, and contingency scenarios unique to their destination. They must build team cohesion with crewmates who will share confined spaces for years. People they must trust completely, communicate with effectively, and live alongside through hardship and monotony and occasional terror. This relationship building cannot be rushed. Teams that have not properly bonded fail in ways that endanger missions. All of this training requires time, typically 2 to 3 years of intensive preparation before a deep space mission launches. This preparation time competes directly with rehabilitation time after previous missions. An astronaut cannot simultaneously rest for recovery and train intensively for the next mission. The activities are physiologically and scheduling-wise incompatible. Recovery requires reduced physical stress, adequate sleep, psychological decompression, and protected time for biological systems to rebuild. Training demands physical conditioning to flight-ready levels, mental loading with new information and procedures, simulation sessions lasting hours, and the stress of performance evaluation. Attempting both simultaneously degrades both. Recovery extends because the body cannot rebuild while being simultaneously stressed by training demands. Training suffers because a recovering body cannot achieve the conditioning levels and sustained focus that preparation requires. The astronaut ends up neither fully recovered nor fully prepared, a compromise that serves neither goal. The practical effect is that astronauts face sequential phases that cannot be overlapped or meaningfully compressed. Recovery must largely complete before intensive training begins. Training must largely complete before the launch window arrives. The phases stack end to end, consuming years that add to years. Any delay in recovery pushes training later. Push training means either missing windows or launching with inadequate preparation. Neither option is acceptable. Mission planners prefer delays to disasters, but delays themselves become disasters for astronaut careers constrained by biological clocks and institutional patience. This brings us back to the mission count reality through an angle entirely separate from biological damage. Even if human bodies could recover faster than they actually do, even if radiation damage could be fully repaired, even if bone density returned perfectly to pre-flight baselines, the calendar would still impose strict limits on lifetime mission count. Windows open on planetary schedules that human preference cannot alter. Training requires years that cannot be meaningfully compressed without compromising mission safety. Recovery demands time that cannot be borrowed from training phases or window opportunities. Risk accumulates with each mission regardless of how well the astronaut recovers between them. The worlds reachable in one lifetime are constrained not just by what bodies can survive, but by what calendars permit and what institutions will approve. The universe enforces waiting periods that mock human impatience and ignore human ambition. Planets orbit at their own stately pace, indifferent to astronaut career timelines, institutional funding cycles, or individual dreams of exploration. The solar system was not designed for human exploration. It simply exists, vast and indifferent, operating on timescales that dwarf human lifespans and distances that dwarf human patience. The calendar trap is not a puzzle to be solved, but a constraint to be accepted, worked within, and ultimately respected as one of the fundamental limits on what any individual can achieve. The following section synthesizes these biological, psychological, institutional, and calendar constraints into a realistic assessment of how many worlds any human could actually reach during one lifetime, and which specific destinations might fill that precious and limited mission budget. The numbers, when finally calculated, are smaller than any science fiction vision has prepared us to accept. The numbers are in. After accounting for biological compounding, institutional barriers, calendar conflicts, and risk accumulation, the question of how many worlds a human could reach in one lifetime resolves to a figure that challenges every science fiction fantasy ever written. The answer is not dozens of planets visited across a swashbuckling career. It is not even 10 destinations reached through determination and advanced technology. For most realistic scenarios, the answer hovers between 2 and 4 distinct worlds across an entire lifetime dedicated to deep space exploration. 2 to 4 worlds. That is the ceiling, that is the boundary, that is the finite frontier. This sobering conclusion emerges from synthesizing all the constraints examined throughout this analysis into a single coherent picture of what human biology, orbital mechanics, institutional risk management, and the calendar actually permit. The synthesis reveals that these constraints do not merely add together, they multiply, creating limitations far more severe than any single factor would impose alone. Begin with the most optimistic scenario imaginable. Construct a theoretical astronaut of exceptional physical resilience, someone whose genetics blessed them with dense bones, efficient DNA repair mechanisms, and cardiovascular systems that adapt and readapt with unusual grace. Select this extraordinary individual at age 30, young enough to have decades of career potential ahead but mature enough to possess the judgment deep space missions demand. Support this optimal astronaut with the most advanced medical and technological resources imaginable. Provide spacecraft with the best radiation shielding engineers can design. Equip rehabilitation facilities with every therapeutic intervention modern medicine can offer. Surround them with flight surgeons who optimize recovery protocols based on the latest research. Give them favorable launch windows that align perfectly with their readiness timelines. Assume perfect mission execution with no complications, no equipment failures requiring extended surface stays, no solar particle events dumping extra radiation, no injuries requiring additional recovery time. Assume recovery timelines at the short end of expected ranges, where biology cooperates fully with ambition. What can this optimal astronaut achieve under these unrealistically favorable conditions? They launch for Mars at 32 after 2 years of mission-specific training. The outbound transit, surface operations, and return journey consume approximately 30 months, landing them back on Earth at 34 or 35. Recovery proceeds at the optimistic end of projections, requiring only 2.5 years before medical boards clear them for another deep space assignment. By 37 or 38, they are ready for Mission 2. They launch for a Jupiter moon, perhaps Europa with its subsurface ocean, at age 38 or 39. This more ambitious mission consumes approximately 6 years for the complete round trip. They return to Earth at 44 or 45. Recovery from such extended exposure requires longer than their Mars rehabilitation demanded. The compounding debt has grown. 4 years pass before they approach flight-ready status again. They reach potential Mission 3 readiness at 48 or 49. At this point, their accumulated radiation exposure approaches career limits. 2 deep space missions have deposited somewhere between 1,000 and 2,000 millisieverts in their tissues, consuming perhaps half to 3/4 of their lifetime allowance depending on sex and the specific exposures encountered. Their bone density has declined through 2 incomplete recovery cycles, now measuring perhaps 15 to 20% below their career starting point. Medical review boards examine every biomarker with heightened scrutiny, looking for trends that might disqualify further flight. A 3rd mission might be possible under this optimistic scenario, perhaps a return to Mars, leveraging their previous experience with that destination. Perhaps a lunar assignment, accepting the symbolic step backward in exchange for lower biological cost. The mission and recovery would extend into their mid to late 50s. By completion of a 3rd mission and subsequent recovery, this optimal astronaut would be approaching 60. At this age, space agencies become extremely reluctant to approve additional multi-year deep space assignments, regardless of apparent health status. The statistical risk of age-related medical events during extended missions exceeds institutional comfort. The 3rd mission represents the practical ceiling. Even under optimal assumptions, 3 distinct destinations over a 25 to 30-year career represents the absolute optimistic maximum for human deep space exploration. Mars, a Jupiter moon, and either a return mission or lunar assignment. 3 worlds touched by 1 human life, under conditions more favorable than reality typically provides. More realistic scenarios suggest fewer achievements. Assume average recovery timelines rather than optimal. The astronaut who needed 2.5 years to recover from Mars under optimistic projections, needs 3.5 years under realistic ones. The Jupiter recovery extends from 4 years to 5. These additions cascade through the career timeline, pushing each subsequent mission later into an aging body. Assume one mission complication that extends rehabilitation by 12 to 18 months. Perhaps unexpected bone loss exceeds predictions, requiring additional time for stabilization. Perhaps a psychological processing need emerges that responsible flight surgeons refuse to rush. Perhaps a minor injury during surface operations requires terrestrial medical intervention that delays return to training status. Any of these common complications, which historical spaceflight experience suggests will occur more often than not, adds years to career timelines. Assume a missed window due to factors beyond the astronaut's control. Spacecraft development delays push a launch date past an opposition window, forcing a 26-month wait for the next Mars opportunity, or a 13-month delay for Jupiter. Crew reassignments responding to another astronaut's medical issue, or family emergency shuffle mission slots in ways that push our subject's flight later. Budget fluctuations in an election year defer a mission that was ready to proceed. These institutional and programmatic factors affect real careers with depressing regularity. Under these conditions, which reflect historical spaceflight experience far more accurately than optimal projections ever could, the same astronaut might complete only 2 deep space missions before age and accumulation barriers close the door permanently. 2 missions, 2 worlds. That is the realistic expectation for human deep space exploration within a single lifetime under current biological and technological constraints. This brings us back to the real limit. Not the void between worlds, but the missions a body can survive. Distance becomes almost irrelevant in this analysis, a strange conclusion that contradicts everything intuition suggests about space exploration. A world 100 million miles away and a world 1 billion miles away both consume 1 mission slot. The world 10 times farther does not cost 10 times as much in the currency that actually matters. It costs the same. 1 mission, 1 recovery cycle, 1 chunk of radiation budget, 1 increment of cumulative risk, 1 step closer to the biological wall. The cost is not measured in miles traveled or years spent in transit. The cost is measured in recovery cycles consumed, radiation doses accumulated, bone density percentage points lost, and institutional clearances that each mission depletes from a lifetime account that never replenishes. An astronaut who flies to Mars has not spent 100 million miles of exploration capacity. They have spent 1 mission. An astronaut who flies to Europa has not spent 500 million miles. They have spent 1 mission, the same 1 mission, despite the vastly greater distance involved. The accounting system that governs human exploration runs on mission count, not odometer readings. This realization transforms strategic thinking about how to allocate the precious few missions any career might contain. What destinations might fill this tiny mission budget of 2 to 4 worlds? The question demands careful analysis because every choice forecloses alternatives, and the selection cannot be revised once missions begin consuming biological capital. Mars presents the obvious first choice for any exploration-focused career. As the most accessible deep space destination with the shortest transit times, most favorable window frequency, and lowest recovery burden among planetary options, Mars offers the highest probability of mission success while preserving the most capacity for subsequent adventures. An astronaut hoping to maximize destination count would almost certainly begin with Mars regardless of which other worlds attract their scientific interest. The logic is straightforward. Mars missions consume less biological capital than outer planet missions. Shorter transit means less microgravity exposure, less radiation accumulation, less bone loss, less cardiovascular adaptation. Faster recovery means more career time remaining after rehabilitation completes. More frequent windows mean better probability of catching favorable alignments with readiness timelines. Starting with a Jupiter moon when Mars remains unvisited would be strategically foolish for an astronaut hoping to see multiple worlds. The Jupiter mission would consume so much biological capacity and calendar time that subsequent missions become unlikely, regardless of remaining ambition. Mars first preserves options, Jupiter first forecloses them. The second mission choice becomes considerably more complex because it depends on what the astronaut values most. A return to Mars would provide continuity of experience and reduce training requirements. The astronaut already knows Mars spacecraft systems, already understands Martian surface operations, already has processed the psychological challenges of that specific mission profile. Training time could be shortened. Preparation could proceed more efficiently. Risk would be lower because familiar scenarios pose fewer surprises. But returning to Mars would mean visiting only one world beyond Earth, across an entire career dedicated to exploration. 2 missions, 1 destination. The astronaut would know Mars deeply, but would never experience the radiation environment of the Jupiter system. Never witness the ice geysers of Europa's surface, never stand where no human has ever stood on a world genuinely different from their first destination. A Jupiter moon mission for the second flight would require longer commitment and higher biological cost. The transit times roughly triple. The radiation environment differs qualitatively as well as quantitatively, with Jupiter's intense magnetosphere creating exposures distinct from the galactic cosmic ray environment encountered en route to Mars. Recovery would demand more time. The calendar trap would bite harder, but Jupiter would add a second genuinely distinct destination to the lifetime achievement list. 2 worlds seen with human eyes. 2 entirely different environments, experienced directly. 2 sets of memories that no one else might ever accumulate because so few humans will ever visit both destinations. For an astronaut prioritizing diversity over depth, the optimal 2-mission career might be Mars followed by Europa or Ganymede. This combination provides direct experience with both inner and outer solar system environments, with both relatively short duration and extended duration mission profiles, with both galactic cosmic radiation and trapped radiation belt exposure. The scientific and experiential return would be maximized, even though total mission count remains limited to 2. A third mission, if biologically achievable and institutionally approved, might return to Mars for an astronaut who has already visited both Mars and a Jupiter moon. The return would leverage existing expertise while adding mission count within constrained biological limits. Alternatively, a third mission might add a lunar destination. The moon, while sometimes excluded from deep space definitions because it lies within Earth's gravitational sphere of influence, represents a world genuinely distinct from Earth. Lunar missions could be completed with considerably lower biological cost than additional planetary missions, preserving whatever capacity remains. An astronaut seeking to maximize world count, above all other considerations, might strategically interleave lunar assignments between or after planetary missions. Moon, Mars, Moon, Europa, Moon. This pattern would touch 3 distinct worlds while managing biological costs through the lower-impact lunar missions. Whether agencies would support such a pattern depends on programmatic priorities, but the biological mathematics would not prohibit it as firmly as they prohibit unlimited planetary missions. Beyond 3 missions, the analysis becomes increasingly speculative and the probabilities increasingly unfavorable. 4th and 5th mission possibilities exist in theoretical space, but face compounding barriers that make actual achievement vanishingly unlikely. Radiation limits would be approached or exceeded by the 4th deep space mission for most astronauts. Bone density would have declined to clinically concerning levels after 3 incomplete recovery cycles. Cardiovascular changes would have accumulated across multiple adaptation cycles, triggering heightened medical scrutiny that few could pass. Age would be advanced into the late 50s or beyond, ranges where institutional approval for multi-year deep space missions becomes extremely improbable. The 4th mission is not impossible, but it is improbable enough that planning for it would be unwise. The 5th mission lies beyond serious consideration for anyone grounded in biological reality. The worlds beyond this tiny mission budget remain forever inaccessible to individual human visitors during single lifetimes. This is perhaps the most poignant implication of the mission count limit. Worlds exist that humans could reach technologically, but cannot reach biologically. Saturn's moons present scientifically compelling targets. Titan possesses a thick atmosphere and surface lakes of liquid methane, the only body beyond Earth with stable surface liquids. Enceladus jets water ice from subsurface oceans through cracks in its frozen shell, offering accessible samples of potentially life-bearing fluids. The Saturn system contains mysteries that might take centuries to fully explore. But Saturn lies too far for inclusion in any realistic human career alongside other destinations. A Saturn mission would consume perhaps 8 to 10 years for the round trip, with recovery requiring another 5 years minimum, 15 years for one destination. An astronaut who flies to Saturn has chosen Saturn as essentially their only deep space destination, with perhaps a lunar mission possible before or after if biology cooperates. Saturn precludes Mars and Jupiter for anyone who visits it. The ice giants Uranus and Neptune remain even further beyond human reach. Never visited by anything more sophisticated than Voyager 2's brief flyby decades ago, these worlds hold secrets about planetary formation and atmospheric chemistry that only direct investigation could reveal. But transit times approaching 15 years each way place them beyond any conceivable human mission architecture. Robotic explorers might someday reach them. Human explorers almost certainly never will. The dwarf planets of the outer solar system, including Pluto and the mysterious bodies of the Kuiper Belt, exist at distances that transform mission planning into generational timelines. New Horizons required nearly a decade just to fly past Pluto without stopping. These destinations remain forever beyond individual human reach regardless of technological advancement. Not because we cannot build ships fast enough, but because human bodies cannot survive journeys long enough. This limitation applies not just to current technology, but to any plausible near-future technological scenario. The constraints are biological before they are engineering. Faster ships would reduce transit times, and nuclear thermal propulsion or eventual fusion drives might cut Mars transit from 6 months to 3 months, or Jupiter transit from 30 months to 12 months. These reductions help at the margins. They shave months from mission durations and slightly reduce cumulative exposure, but they do not transform the fundamental mathematics. 3-month Mars transit still requires 3 months of microgravity, radiation exposure, and physiological adaptation. The recovery burden decreases but does not disappear. Better radiation shielding would reduce exposure, and water walls, polyethylene barriers, or magnetic deflection systems might cut radiation doses by half or more. These improvements extend radiation budgets and might permit one additional mission before career limits are reached, but they cannot eliminate cosmic ray exposure entirely. Some radiation penetrates any practical shielding. The reduction helps but does not transform. Artificial gravity through rotating habitats might preserve bone density and muscle mass during transit, eliminating one of the major biological costs of spaceflight. This technology could significantly extend mission count limits by removing the bone and muscle components of compounding debt, but artificial gravity introduces new engineering challenges, new failure modes, new training requirements, and it does nothing to address radiation exposure, which would remain the ultimate limiting factor even if skeletal and muscular costs were eliminated. Medical advances might accelerate recovery, and pharmaceutical interventions, genetic therapies, or enhanced rehabilitation protocols might cut recovery times from 3 years to 2 years or from 5 years to 3 years. These improvements help with calendar constraints and might permit additional window catches, but they face fundamental biological limits that cannot be engineered around. Cellular repair mechanisms operate at speeds set by biochemistry. Bone remodeling proceeds at rates established by evolutionary history. No intervention can make biology run dramatically faster than biology runs. The fundamental constraint is not technological, but biological. Human bodies evolved for one world under specific conditions, including one gravity, magnetic field protection, and atmospheric shielding from radiation. Leaving that world imposes costs that cannot be fully avoided through engineering or fully repaired through medicine. Each departure extracts payment from reserves that can never be completely replenished. The mission count remains finite regardless of how cleverly engineers design spacecraft or how heroically astronauts endure hardship. What does this mean for humanity's relationship with the cosmos? The question shifts from physics to philosophy, from engineering calculations to meaning-making. If individual humans can visit only 2 or 3 worlds across entire lifetimes dedicated to exploration, then humanity's experience of the solar system must be distributed rather than concentrated. No single person can see it all. No individual explorer can visit Mars and Europa, and Titan and Enceladus and Triton, standing on each surface and experiencing each environment directly. The solar system is simply too large, and human lifetimes too short, and human bodies too fragile for comprehensive individual exploration. The exploration project, therefore, becomes inherently collective in ways that terrestrial exploration never quite required. Individual astronauts contribute their 2 or 3 worlds to a cumulative human experience that grows across generations. One explorer's Mars becomes context for another explorer's Jupiter, which becomes foundation for a third explorer's Saturn. The complete picture emerges only through combination, never through individual achievement. This collective distribution has precedent in human exploration history, though the precedents are imperfect. No single terrestrial explorer visited every continent or mapped every ocean. Columbus never saw the Pacific. Magellan died before completing his circumnavigation. Cook explored the Pacific, but never the Amazon. Individual journeys contributed to cumulative knowledge that exceeded what any individual could achieve alone. Space exploration follows this same pattern, but with constraints far more absolute than those faced by terrestrial explorers. Columbus could theoretically have sailed to every coastline, given sufficient time and luck. His body would not have objected to additional voyages in the way astronaut bodies object to additional missions. The terrestrial exploration limit was primarily logistical and lifespan-based. The space exploration limit is fundamentally biological in ways that logistics cannot address. The realization also forces reconsideration of what exploration means when direct experience becomes impossible. If visiting multiple worlds in person remains biologically limited to small numbers, then remote exploration through robotic proxies becomes not a consolation prize, but a strategic necessity. The worlds beyond human reach are not beyond human knowledge. They simply require instruments rather than bodies to investigate. Robotic explorers face none of the biological constraints that limit human mission count. They do not accumulate radiation damage in ways that prevent future missions. They do not lose bone density in microgravity. They do not require recovery periods between assignments. They do not age past institutional clearance thresholds. They can be built, launched, operated, and replaced indefinitely. A single human lifetime might witness dozens of robotic missions to worlds that same lifetime could never visit in person. The knowledge gained through remote exploration might exceed what any human explorer could accumulate through direct experience, even if the experiential quality differs fundamentally. Perhaps the most profound implication of mission count limits concerns human identity in the cosmic context. We evolved as a species capable of wondering about other worlds, of building instruments to observe them, of dreaming about visiting them. But we also evolved as biological organisms incapable of visiting more than a few of those worlds in person during any individual existence. This limitation is not temporary, awaiting technological solution. It is structural, built into the architecture of biological systems that evolved for specific conditions on one specific world. Human bodies cannot be fundamentally redesigned to tolerate unlimited spaceflight without becoming something other than human in the biological sense that word has always carried. The astronaut who visits Mars and then Europa has achieved something remarkable by any measure humanity has ever applied to achievement. They have stood on two worlds beyond Earth. They have experienced environments radically different from the evolutionary cradle. They have seen sunrises and sunsets that no other human might ever witness. They have extended human presence into realms that were pure abstraction for all previous generations. But they have also reached a limit. Not a limit of courage, which they demonstrated by accepting the risks. Not a limit of funding, which they secured through institutional support. Not a limit of technology, which carried them successfully across the void. A limit of what a human body can survive and recover from, what cellular repair mechanisms can handle, what bone and muscle and heart and brain can endure and rebuild from and endure again. The third or fourth mission is not waiting just beyond the horizon, accessible to anyone willing to train harder or accept more risk. It is blocked by barriers internal rather than external, biological rather than engineering, structural rather than circumstantial. This understanding transforms appreciation for every successful mission ever completed and every successful mission yet to come. Each deep space journey consumes irreplaceable biological capital. Each astronaut who completes a mission to another world has invested years of their life and portions of their health that can never be regained or restored. The cost is not abstract accounting. It is personal, paid in cellular damage and extended rehabilitation, in opportunities foreclosed and alternative paths not taken, in risks accepted and sometimes realized. The finite frontier is not infinite at all. It is bounded by human biology as surely as by the physics of light, speed, and orbital mechanics. The number of worlds reachable in one lifetime is small enough to count on one hand, often small enough to count on one finger, always small enough to force choices that foreclose alternatives. The selection of which worlds to attempt becomes one of the most consequential choices any explorer can make. Knowing that choosing this destination means not choosing those destinations, knowing that each mission spent is a mission that cannot be spent again, knowing that the body keeps score, and that score moves only in one direction. This is the truth that mission count analysis reveals. Not that space is vast, which everyone knows, and poets have celebrated for millennia. Not that distances are challenging, which engineers can address through clever trajectory design and powerful propulsion, but that human bodies are finite in ways that no amount of bravery or funding or technological innovation can overcome. The ultimate limit on human space exploration is not the darkness between stars or even the lesser darkness between planets. It is the fragility of the explorers themselves, the biological constraints that evolution built into organisms designed for one world and unsuited for repeated departures from it. The answer to how many worlds a human could reach in one lifetime is 2 to 4 under optimal conditions. Likely 2 or 3 under realistic conditions, possibly just 1 if complications intervene, or if the chosen destination lies far enough from Earth to consume an entire career in a single mission. This answer may disappoint those raised on science fiction visions of planet-hopping adventures, of captains visiting dozens of worlds across serialized careers, of explorers treating the solar system as a neighborhood to stroll through at leisure. Those visions emerge from storytelling that ignores biology, or imagines biology transformed beyond recognition. But the real answer also elevates the significance of every mission actually achieved and every mission yet to be attempted. When humans eventually stand on Mars, they will be consuming mission capacity they can never replenish. They will be spending biological currency that cannot be re-earned. They will be taking a step that forecloses some future steps while enabling others. The significance of that moment derives partly from its irreversibility, from the knowledge that it costs something real that cannot simply be paid again. When humans venture to the moons of Jupiter, they will be approaching the limits of what biology permits within individual lifetimes. They will be pushing against boundaries that cannot be pushed much further. The achievement will carry weight precisely because it cannot be casually repeated. precisely because it represents a significant fraction of what any human can ever accomplish in deep space exploration. Each world visited represents not just a triumph of engineering and courage, but a commitment of finite human capability that cannot be spent twice. The significance flows from the scarcity, the meaning emerges from the limitation. The worlds are out there, countless and varied, waiting to be explored. Rocky planets with ancient surfaces, icy moons with hidden oceans, gas giants with swirling storms, dwarf planets with exotic chemistries, asteroids and comets and bodies we have not yet discovered. The solar system alone contains enough destinations to occupy explorers for millennia, but not any single explorer, and not any single lifetime. The exploration of the cosmos is a relay race, not a sprint. Each generation hands off to the next. Each individual contributes what their mission budget allows. Each astronaut adds their 2 or 3 worlds to a growing collection that eventually encompasses what no individual could encompass alone. The cumulative achievement exceeds what any individual could accomplish, precisely because individuals are limited in ways that collectives are not. This is the finite frontier. Not a barrier to despair over, but a boundary to understand and plan within. The mission count is limited. The destinations must be chosen wisely. The biological budget must be respected. And the adventure, constrained though it is, remains among the greatest humanity can undertake. 2 to 4 worlds. That is what a human lifetime permits. That is the answer to the question this analysis posed at its beginning. Not the dozens that science fiction promises, not the unlimited access that fantasy provides. A small number, countable on fingers, forcing choices that matter because they cannot be unmade. The void between worlds is not the limit. The missions a body can survive is the limit. And within that limit, within that small number of achievable destinations, within that finite budget of recoveries and clearances and windows caught, lies everything that human space exploration can mean for any individual who attempts it. The frontier is finite, but it is still a frontier. And frontiers, even bounded ones, remain worth crossing.